Now that we have our first playbook, let's go ahead and execute it. I'm going to jump onto the control machine in my Ansible directory, and I will type Ansible Playbook, playbooks, hostname.yaml. So note a few differences about the execution that's as compared to running the Ansible command. One is that we're now using Ansible Playbook instead of Ansible. So Ansible by itself is used for ad hoc execution. Ansible Playbook takes a playbook as an entry point. And you'll notice that we didn't pass a -m or a -a. The contents of the M and the A are really now contained inside of the playbook, right? So the command and the arguments are inside of the playbook, so we don't need to pass any of that on the command line. And we also don't pass a target pattern. So we specify the entry point for the playbook, but the target is specified really statically encoded in the playbook here in the host key for the play. We've gone from a dynamic interrogation using a ad hoc module, argument, and host list to just execute this playbook, which has already defined those things in code. Now note the differences about the output of the playbook execution. First off, we have the play itself, which we ran against all. And this first step is gathering facts. And we're going to talk a lot about facts later on, but just know that we have this additional step now where the first thing that Ansible does is log in to each end host and get a list of facts or details about that end host and brings it back so that they can be injected into the playbooks. And you can build logic into your playbooks using these details about the individual hosts. It's not required, it's optional. In our case, we don't use any of those, but by default, Ansible is going to execute the gathering facts step as its first step in each playbook execution. Secondly, we see that the task is executed, and by default, the name is created using the command or the module that's specified and some arguments. So Ansible is going to craft this name for us by default, and you can see command host name is almost literally what we've typed into our playbook here. And you can see that it was run for all 5 of the hosts in our environment. Notice that the status now reports has changed. Back when we were running with the Ansible execution, the status was either success or failure. Now we see that the status is changed for the execution, and we don't see the standard out. We don't see the actual name of the host name being executed. And this really starts to illustrate a shift in the thinking about the way that we're using Ansible. Rather than querying the end host for some information and wanting to see that information live, we're shifting towards a situation where we don't care so much about the actual value of the result, just that the execution happened without errors. So we trust that what we're trying to do is converge on some end configuration state and not necessarily get back specific information for this particular command. And here at the end of the execution, we have the play recap, which shows us all of the hosts that were targeted during this execution, and the number of changes or the number of steps that took place. And you can see we had the one change for the command output and everything went okay. Something else to note about this change is that all we did was execute a command which reported some output, but from Ansible's perspective, it reports that as a change on the end host, even though really, logically speaking, we didn't make any real modification. And this highlights the fact too about idempotence and the danger of using things like command and shell. Many of the modules, Ansible is able to tell automatically, yes, there was a change that happened, or there was not a change that happened. And when there's no change, you'll see an OK, and that step will skip. In our case, running command, it's really up to the contents of our command to determine if there was a logical change on our system. So Ansible reports back, I got some output. We believe something's changed here. There are ways that you can make the shell and the command more idempotent and modify that. But from Ansible's perspective, it has no awareness, only that the command ran and it exited successfully. That's why we don't see it as a failure. But other than that, the command is just complete. And it's up to us to determine whether that really made a meaningful change on our system. One last thing we'll do here is modify the name of this command. So by default, I said that Ansible will give the name to the task. Now, if you wanted to provide some more detail, you could specify the name yourself. So if we go back to the playbook, instead of directly entering the command as the only key, we can specify the name key as a part of this task and give it some other interesting name. So let's say something like get server hostname, and we'll save that and execute it again. Now the contents of the command has not changed. The underlying task is going to execute exactly the same way. But at least now, when we execute it and look at the output in our terminal, we get something more meaningful to us. So you see now that the task has changed from command hostname to get server hostname. In this case, command hostname is pretty explanatory, so that wouldn't have been a problem. But in more complex scenarios, rather than seeing just a raw shell command or some other underlying cryptic command, you can actually supply your own name, sort of like a label or a heading that allows you to get some better reference as to what's happening in that particular task.